Tonight, we are in conversation with Magers and Quinn, Tonight, we are at Magers and Quinn Booksellers in uptown Minneapolis, Minnesota, with author Rickey Fayne, talking about his latest book, The Devil Three Times. Welcome, Rickey.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I am so excited you're here. I have so many questions. Let me first start by saying thank you. I loved your book. It was so complex, much like humanity itself. Rickey, before we get into a reading, for our listeners who haven't had a chance to read your wonderful book, can you give us a quick overview and introduce us to some of the main characters? What's your book about?
Sure. So it's pretty much following one black family from the Middle Passage all the way up into the present, right? And this family is interesting because they have I don't want to give too much away, but they have a sort of spiritual sensitivity that's sort of been gifted to them by the devil to sort of help them navigate American racism, right? So that's sort of the broad overview.
That is fascinating because they'll get a little bit more in the prologue when you read, but that is a great overview. I hadn't thought about it quite that way. Will you give us the gift of doing a reading?
Sure.
Thanks, Rickey.
All right, so just to say a little bit about the voice and the third person voice here. I've always loved folklore, and also I grew up going to church fairly often, so it's kind of a mix of those two things, but it's also the voice my father used to tell stories in, right? So as I'm reading this, or as I was writing it, I was thinking of him, right? So it's sort of weird for me to hear it in my voice, because I'm like, this is his voice, but I'll try to do it justice. In the beginning was the Word, but before the Word spoke, there was the devil. And he was hell-bent on sowing unrest and upheaval amongst the angels in heaven. You see, the devil loved nothing so much as stirring shit up, inciting seraphim to fisticuffs. Jophiel and Michael all but threw hands when the devil doused the former's flaming sword and blamed the latter, and, worst of all, confounding that tall, not terribly bright Archangel Gabriel's mind with questions like, how does God expect us to reconcile free will with providence divine? When God heard that, he said, now, devil, I done put up with your foolishness long enough. And before the devil could plead his case, God stomped his right foot, parted the clouds, and like a storm from paradise, the devil rained down. The devil sat there on the cold, dark earth with his head hung low, powerful, lonesome. And when God said, let there be light, he hid in the shadows. From there, he tempted Eve with his serpent, loosed Cain on Abel, and taught Noah how to drink and get naked. Now, Noah's folks like the devil, and the devil like Noah's folks. Anybody who can hold their liquor and keep their lives straight is never long in wanting friends. But he couldn't joke with Noah's folks like he could angels. They didn't banter, trade tall tales, kid, or have wolf tickets for sale. I mean, it was sad. Those poor folks couldn't cut the monkey if it held the knife for them. Case in point, one day the devil greeted Ham by asking him how he got to be so high on the hog, live so large, but Noah's son couldn't pick up what the devil put down. Just stood there as blank-faced and bewildered as the day he caught an eye full of his daddy's manhood. And so, though it pained his conscience, the devil had no choice but to trick Nimrod, Ham's grandson, into getting him home. You see, Nimrod claimed his might rivaled God's, ruled according to a merciless code. Nimrod's people couldn't do nothing without Nimrod's say-so. All the devil had to do to trick Nimrod was testify to all the ways God flouted his laws. God's crimes were as numerous as they were inimical, being everywhere and nowhere all at once, working in ways mysterious, and bringing the world into being without Nimrod's input. Who gave God leave to make the earth and the heavens? Nimrod certainly hadn't sanctioned it. What was more, the devil said, pacing back and forth in front of the court, the great maker added insult to injury by failing to present himself to Nimrod, stand trial, and account for his many offenses. How could Nimrod abide such impertinence unless... And here the devil paused for dramatic effect. Could it be Nimrod was not as powerful as he led folks to believe? Was the only power Nimrod had over the power the people conceded? All at once the people turned to Nimrod, considering, how bad was this man really? Already they were plotting. Already they were scheming. Nimrod could feel it. His iron grip was slipping. Nimrod's only hope was to string his bow to back his boast. Fire arrows into heaven and hit something, anything celestial. I'm no expert on the science of it, the devil said. But you might have a better shot at God if you aim from higher up. What if you built a tower? That just might be the best idea anyone's ever had, Nimrod said, seeing at once the project's potential to unite the populace and divert attention from his gross incompetence. The devil could hardly believe folks had let someone so self-interested lead them. No matter, once he climbed the Tower of Babel and spread his wings, he would be home, free of these terrible people. Just as the devil was in spitting distance of the pearly gates, though, God wrinkled his nose, confounded all the bricklayers, reached out from the clouds, and flicked the tower down. The devil kicked around for a while after that, propping up empires and watching them fall, making waves wherever he found calm. Before long, he heard tell of God sending down his only son, which hurt the devil's feelings because even though they butted heads now and then, the devil always thought of himself as God's own. But he didn't harp on God counting him out and was ready to forgive his father's every trespass if only he could just get home. And so the devil set out to find Jesus, God's favorite son, and caught up to him in the wilderness, hunting up four-leaf clovers, worrying the manes off dandelions, and watching the wind blow clouds about. The devil spent 40 days and 40 nights trying to reason with Jesus, brother to brother. Jesus, the devil said, I'm not evil, not really. How could I be? Ain't nothing in me God ain't put there. Ain't a thing in my heart God didn't smile upon. All I want is to get back home. When Jesus heard the devil's words, he wept. Because you know Jesus real soft-hearted. Especially when it comes to fathers not doing right by their sons. Jesus himself didn't hear from his real daddy until he was damn near 31. Jesus said, devil, you really have touched me. My wings ain't strong enough to fly us both up to heaven, but if you can hold out just a little bit longer, I'll bend God's ear and see if we can't work out something. And so the devil bided his time for a few more eons, making bargains here, turning the soul into away from God there, but his heart wasn't ever really in it. When he just about lost all faith in Jesus, Jesus came to the devil in a dream. I've been working overtime on God, Jesus said, and he still ain't budged. I'll keep after it, but in the meantime, I need you to help me. You heard about what's happening in Africa? The devil said he hadn't. Jesus said, they're robbing up black folks from the one and working them to death in the other. They're robbing up black folks from there and working them to death in America. Huh, the devil said. Ain't that something? But he was only half listening. No human suffering could rival his own. All the devil took from Jesus' words was that Jesus had yet to find him a way home. Jesus hauled off and backhanded the poor devil. Clap. Listen to me, Jesus said. It is something, and you the somebody who needs to fix it. Ain't that God's problem, the devil asked, trying to rub some feeling back into his cheek, wondering what on earth had turned his sweet baby brother so evil mean. You think, Jesus huffed, but he's up in heaven twiddling his thumbs, says all humans are one race, acting like he can't see color from his gold throne. The devil was struck dumb. He ain't never once in his life imagined Jesus would fix his mouth to talk wet about God. And if you was struck too, then the joke's on you. Because if ain't the one thing in this world true, it's that Jesus loves him some black folks and black folks love them some Jesus. It's like they're the hand and he's the thumb, and he gets powerful angry when he sees them done wrong. Go south, Jesus told the devil. Free my people and watch out for them until I return. You do this for me, and I promise that one day I'll find a way to get you home. And when the devil woke, that's just what he did and is, even now, still trying to do. That's why black people have to go through hell to get free. And how come to this day, the devil won't leave them be.
That was author Rickey Fayne, reading from The Devil 3 Times. We're recording with a live audience at Magers Quinn Booksellers. I'm your host, Lissa Jones, and this is Black Market Reads. Please welcome back author Rickey Fayne. It was marvelous to hear you read, just to hear the spirit of the thing, to hear you use language. So there's so many things I want to ask you. Do you mind if we dive right in?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, let's go, Rickey. So in The Devil 3 Times, the devil is portrayed not merely as a symbol of evil, even in the prologue, but as a complex character seeking redemption. Your portrayal of the devil challenges traditional narratives. What inspired you to depict him as a figure striving for redemption? And how does this reflect on the broader themes of salvation and morality in your book? The devil seems a persistent character without, but our question is, why the devil 3 times? So those are lots of questions, and I can ask them again, but you get the general gist, Rickey. Take it away.
Well, I'll start in with the last question. The devil 3 times, it comes from a couple of places. So one of them first was in Black Southern religious traditions, like there's this idea that in order to preach, you have to be called 3 times, right? So like the first 2 times you have to deny God, and then that last time, that's when it's supposed to stick, right? So I thought it would be interesting to think about, like, what if the devil was the one doing the calling, right? But also too, I feel like the idea of like the Holy Trinity, right? And sort of like making it like, what if it was the devil there too? But as for like just portraying the devil, so I was writing this, one of the characters is very much inspired by Robert Johnson, right? He's sort of like a blues singer who met the devil at the crossroads and supposedly sold his soul for musical talent. And so one of the first things this person says is, you know, the devil came for me 3 times, right? And so I thought it was, I don't know, it was interesting to sort of think about like what would it mean for someone to like be constantly interacting with the devil, right? But then also too, I was reading some of Zora Neale Hurston's folklore, just trying to get a sense of like how I wanted this figure to appear. And there's this one like really brief story that she recorded from someone where it was kind of a joke story. It was one day somebody was like late for work and they were running and they jumped over a fence post and they tore their shirt, right? And so out of frustration they yell, the devil. And then he hears someone crying and he turns and he's like, and it was the devil. And he was crying, he's like, you know, everything y'all say I did isn't my fault. He was like, some of that stuff's on y'all, right? So it's just sort of that idea, like, what would that particular character or that sort of rendering of the devil, like, what would be his history, right? How would he tell the stories in the Bible?
I am deeply fascinated by considering the Holy Trinity would include the devil. I mean, okay. I'm gonna have to drop this paper and start over.
You know, and I'm thinking of, this is partially inspired, of course, you know, the work of Toni Morrison is always omnipresent, right? So there's that moment in Sula where she calls Sula sort of like the 4th face of God, right? So there's this idea that like, in West African cultures, like evil is always accounted for. It's not a problem. It's the way things are supposed to be, like part of the balance, right? And it's not really evil. It's just like, maybe you don't understand how this is helping you and it looks bad in the moment, but really it's good for you.
I don't know that I've ever been speechless on Black Market Reads, but they're gonna have to do a lot of editing on this show because I just keep thinking, keep talking, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about generational trauma and resistance. Your book, your novel spans 175 years. How did you maintain continuity? What challenges did you face, and how could you keep it together across such a broad timeline?
Yeah, so I feel like that part came pretty easy to me because the way that the characters came to me was so this book started out as a failed short story. And it's still sort of like a failed short story in a lot of ways because it's not short. But as an exercise, I was like, what if I write out like some of these side characters' backstories? And one just kind of led me to another, right? So I started thinking about this person and their life and where they grew up, and of course there are other people there. And then I would get distracted by the background characters, right? So I would be thinking about, what was their uncle said this weird thing. What is his story? And then it's like, well, this goes back to their grandfather or their grandmother, right? So it just sort of came that way, like just like following one side character after another until I had to eventually stop myself by just going all the way back to the beginning of time and like, okay, this is the start, and now I can write these people's stories because I've gone back far enough.
Thank you. You know, language is so critical. How did you manage the language changes? It seemed almost seamless. It didn't matter the class, it didn't matter the time, you seemed to just go back and forth in a very simple way that you read the prologue, but it was very complex. Can you talk to me about how you did that?
So I had this idea that I wanted each portion to sort of map onto both the major genres of the time period, and then also sort of be sort of written in that same voice. And I kind of let go of that a little bit as I was writing, but I held on to this idea that I wanted people to think and talk as if they were still in those time periods. So at various points, I like reread all of my favorite books that were sort of like written in those time periods, and just tried to keep those in my mind as I was working on each individual character, right? So like I would say the voice that's the most outlandish, right? I would say Asa chapter, though he doesn't speak like how anyone else in the book speaks. And I mean, I was reading so much. Well, he talks about it in the book. So much pretty much all the people he talks about were people I was reading. He's talking about the Brontes. He's talking about Jane Austen, and that's sort of where his language gets pulled through this sort of like, well, what if it was Jane Austen, but this sort of like Creole figure who's also a slave owner, but is pretending to be white. So it's sort of like just in that way.
I would like to be in your mind for about 2 minutes to just figure out what is going on up there, because this is very complex. You also talk about the inheritance of pain and strength. The Laurent family, really goes through trauma and demonstrates resilience, how it's passed down generation to generation. What does that suggest about the capacity for healing and growth in families and communities?
Well, I think the short answer is it's possible, but it takes a long time, right? Because I feel like I feel like a lot of the things that we as individuals struggle with, a lot of the times are the same things our parents struggle with, right? Because we were taught to cope with things the way they cope with things, right? Like if your caregiver ran from things, your tendency is probably going to be to run from things, or your tendency is going to be really frustrated with people that run from things, right? So there's either way you're influenced by that. So I wanted to sort of think about how that was acted out over time, because I feel like what happens with the idea is that each generation gets a little bit better with managing their children, right? Or is a little bit kinder to them, or understands more, or tries to push them a little bit further, right? So the idea is that you want to give, it's a tricky balance. You want to give your children the best of what you had without sort of like the extra baggage, right? But then each generation feels like, oh, but it wasn't enough, right? Like I remember my dad loved to play basketball. I don't play basketball, but he loved to play basketball, and he was really good at it. And one of the things he was always upset about, because his dad had, he was always working like 3 or 4 jobs, like side jobs. He never made it to a game. And so when I was like very badly playing my sports and sitting on the bench most of the time, he was there every time, right? So that's an example of like him being like, this is something I wanted, and I want to be there for you in this way, right? But I feel like you never really appreciate it in the time. It's only after you grow up and you're trying to give your kids, or like your younger cousins, or like the younger people in your life, what you got, and you realize, oh, this was a choice. They weren't just like this. This isn't just the course of life. This is, you have to make the choice to show up for these people in these ways, right? So, and then you begin to appreciate all of these people gave me all of these things, and I didn't see it at the time, but now I do, and I want to give more.
That's very telling. I think that's a sort of a part of the getting older process, is when you're younger, you're running so fast and you're doing so many things, and you can't see how people are pouring into you, and then when you slow down, you recognize, man, Rickey used to say that. So-and-so told me that. That's really... Let's talk about the power of storytelling and cultural memory. Storytelling is central to your novel, and you talked to me earlier about your father and his role in storytelling, so let's just start there. How did your father inspire you to use storytelling as a narrative form?
Well, he would always, he was a really gifted storyteller, and it took me a long time to realize I thought he just had he had an interesting life, but he made his life more interesting by being a gifted storyteller. Where like, you know how you like live through something with someone, and you think about it one way, and then they tell it to someone else, you're like, oh man, I was not there for that, right? So I feel like he had this sort of gift, and occasionally people would invite him to like tell stories for me. Like he was always telling them, if you're in the room with him for long enough, what's gonna happen. But in a like quasi-formal capacity, sometimes like our church would ask him like, oh, can you like speak? and he would like make up these parables that had nothing to do with the Bible. Like, and he would just like I remember the one that stuck with me the most was he was so they weren't quite this, and this is where that sort of mix come from. Like, it's not sermon and it's not folklore, but it's like something in the middle. That's kind of what he would do. Where he was telling us a story once about this chicken and this pig get together and decide they want to give these starving kids a meal. And the chicken's like, let's give them breakfast, and the pig's like, wait, hold on, you giving someone breakfast, that's like not the same as me giving someone breakfast. So we have to figure out, like, is this worth the sacrifice, right? And the idea is that, like, people are always sacrificing to different levels, right? You have to appreciate, like, you giving that much may not be as much as someone else giving. So I feel like that story always stuck with me, but also just the idea that stories can be a vehicle for more than what they're about on the surface, right? Like, you can revisit them and see more, or people can sort of give a new angle on it, right? And I feel like that's what we do in this culture all the time. Like, I feel like we only have a handful of stories, but we keep retelling them, right? And we keep retelling them in different ways, and it's almost as if like we haven't learned the lesson yet. Like, maybe 1,000 years from now, the lesson will be learned and we won't have to tell this story, but we're still in the midst of telling each other these stories.
That is fascinating to me. In fact, what role do you think oral storytelling has in shaping cultural identity? Why is it important?
Well, I feel like oral storytelling is important because, well, so you have, of course, written storytelling has its place, right? Like, you have like a bound record, like, these are the way things work. But I feel like what's beautiful about oral storytelling is that even if the story's the same, the way the teller tells it is always going to be different, right? So there's always this way in which it's growing and transforming, right? And also adapting to the moment, right? Like, a story that meant something 100 years ago may have to be tweaked a little bit to mean something to someone today. And by like keeping the same story alive in each generation, you can sort of naturally make those changes as you go, right? But also like have sort of like the DNA of the source story always there.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you have thoughts about how the recent trends toward cancel culture and the removal of race-specific narratives, particularly African American, from government and other websites? Can you talk about what you were thinking about that?
I'm less so thinking and more so just feeling pretty terrible. The situation, like, it's hard to just be like, I can't, like, it's like you're not surprised that it's happening, but you're mad that you were right that it's happening, right?
It's the black situation.
Yeah, I think it's just like, oh, I knew they were going to do that.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, so I mean, that's my feelings on it. It's just like I'm very disappointed that we're back here at this place again, right? But I feel like that's also, it reminds me of in the introduction to Arna Bontemps, who is this this Harlem Renaissance, one of the like lesser known Harlem Renaissance figures. He wrote this retelling of Gabriel Prosser's Rebellion, right? And in the second introduction to it, he has this moment where he said, I thought, because he was writing it on the eve of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. Like, this is the reintroduction of it. And he said, time is not a river, time is a pendulum, right? And he was thinking about like how much hope he had for everything in the 20s, and how he and the people he was with thought that, their stories and their poems and their studies were going to do all of these great things, and it seemed like we were just on the verge, right? But then comes like the market crash, and it seems like a lot of that work kind of gets swept under the rug, and of course it gets rediscovered, right, as like in the civil rights movement. Like, a lot of that, like that, the narrative we have of that moment was framed by later generations, sort of like going back and saying, no, this is important, and we need to think about what these people were doing and saying and how they were talking to each other. This is an example of how things can be different than they are now, or how we can get back to making that progress. But that idea of like time being a pendulum really stuck with me, right? Whereas it's like, as soon as we get this far, we go back the other way, right? And what does it mean? I feel like it reframed the way I think about progress. Whereas, like, I think, okay, I've been looking at the pendulum going from this arc to the other, but the real progress is happening below the pendulum and what's being cut. And that's always getting deeper and deeper no matter which edge we're at, right? So it's sort of how I was thinking about how the sort of change and dealing with generational trauma works. Because no one generation fixes it, but by the time you get to the end of the book, the lives of the Laurent family, like their children, seem like they're going to be better off, right? Like their problems are more, they've moved higher up on the order of need. I forget the name of that. Hierarchy of needs, right? Like the problems that they're dealing with are like what we would call like first world or like middle class problems. Whereas like the ancestors that are trying to help them through them, right? They had, more serious issue or more life or death moments, right? And so they don't feel like, they think things are terrible, but like the ancestors are looking at them and being like, no, I'm glad you're there. And not me.
This is fascinating to me. I did not catch the depth of some of the symbolism that you're sharing with us tonight, and I want to say thank you, because I'm going to go back and read it again, smarter this time. Thinking about legacy and memory, do you hope that people take away a message regarding the importance of remembering and honoring our ancestors and the stories that define them? Do you hope they take something away from it in terms of a message?
Yeah, I do, but I don't have any specific one thing that I would want people to walk away with. I more so just want it to be sort of like how I was talking about how like stories can sort of always be more than what they're about on the surface. Like I would love for like someone 100 years from now to go back and be like, oh, they're doing this thing, and be like, oh, okay, you said it, that was happening. That's wonderful. I'm glad you saw that in there. But I also feel like, I know I had another thought, but it's escaping me. What was your question?
It's no problem. Talking about legacy and memory. What do you want readers to take away?
Yeah. I'm thinking of, I also have in the back of my mind too, I feel like I'm just quoting other people. Like this is how you, like these thoughts went through my head. I'm thinking of Walter Benjamin's thesis on the philosophy of history, where he has this quote where he says like, in a redeemed humanity, all moments will be citable, right? And I feel like that's what the work of writers is to do. Like we don't know the importance of what we're recording, right? And I think the idea is we can't get too caught up in it, but we should just try to record it as faithfully as possible for that day when humanity is redeemed and all the moments are there to be cited.
Can you say that again? What's the quote?
In a redeemed humanity, all moments will be citable. Or something of that. I mean, it's translated from German, so some translators said that. Yeah, I think it's thesis 10.
One of the pieces that you and I and Black Market Read shares as a point of inquiry is, what is literature? What have you learned about what literature actually is? Because we wrestle with it all the time. Is it a librettist? Is it, who is a writer? What is literature? What have you discovered?
I think for me, or this is what I tell my students. I feel like I when I pretend to know the answer, I say that it's writing that's more than the sum of its parts. Where like it has to be, like you can't reduce it. Like the words you would have to use in order to describe what's happening in it are always going to outpace the words that are actually on the page. So I feel like when that happens, I'm like, okay, it's opening up a larger space than it inhabits, right? And so I always think of literature as something that does that.
I love the broad nature of that definition. It allows for so many things to be literature. And that's sort of the way we've embraced it too. What isn't literature? I didn't even have that on my page, but you inspired me to ask.
I don't know, that's a tougher question.
Yeah, that is a tougher question.
I think the thing is too that I feel like our lens is sort of like confined to our moment for better or worse, right? So it could be one of those things where I feel like someone was saying that like, oh, Shakespeare wasn't considered serious. And I said this was like the soap opera version of plays, and there are more serious playwrights doing other things. But who's the person whose plays we keep adapting and rethinking and citing, like making our 13-year-olds read over and over again, right? So I mean, I can't say what's not. I could say, I don't know. I always tend to think that maybe if I don't see all of what it's doing, I want to say the limitations with me.
Oh, I really like that. The limitations, I like that. Let's talk about Black freedom. You write, Black freedom is an oxymoron. When I was traveling to the EJI Museum in Montgomery, Elizabeth Alexander, the poet, said Black people in America have yet to breathe free air. And it's been more than 500 years. What did you mean that Black freedom is an oxymoron, even though I'm picking up what you're laying down, let everybody else know?
Well, I mean, I feel like for a number of reasons, right? I feel like, what is freedom even really? And that sounds so terrible. Like if someone gave me that answer, I'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But I think that like the way we think about it, right, as like sort of just like, I think the first definition is just I can do what I want without anybody stopping me, right? And you think like if that's what freedom is, I feel like we need to go back to the drawing board. I feel like I feel like part of what I was trying to work out in the book was the idea that, I feel like you can't go through this world without belonging to someone or something. The freedom is like choosing what you belong to and how much you're willing to fight or devote to that, right? Like if you belong to your family and your loved ones and people who are doing, I feel like worthwhile things in the world, I feel like that's one thing. Or if you belong to, the car you want or the house you want or the material possessions you want, then you're going to be, for better or worse, owned by someone or something. I feel like that's what I was thinking about, like with the idea of like divine providence versus like free will, right? Like there's this, like even if it's not divine providence, really, you can't exist, apart from everything else in the world. Like that would be, I guess, pure freedom, right? Nothing, I'm not inhibited from doing anything, and then that becomes doing nothing, right? It becomes the same thing. So it's more about, I guess, that choice of what or who you belong to.
That is fascinating to me. Would that same definition be true if you weren't African American?
Well, I mean, I feel like the thing is, I'm thinking about Saidiya Hartman. Yeah, I'm thinking about Saidiya Hartman, and what she says about fungibility, right? Like the idea that like once you decided that you can exchange a person for money or things, then the battle was lost, right? Like humanity doesn't exist on that level anymore. Like if you can enslave one person, then it's possible to enslave any person, right? So it's the idea that like I feel like there are always going to be people who I feel like the power structure decides are less than, right? And it's so that everyone else can point to those people and say, well, you might have it bad, but at least you're not as bad as them, right? But the truth is that you're just as held captive by that system as they are. It may not look or feel the same, but if you try to do something too far out of the way, you will learn pretty quickly that you're not as free as you thought you were.
I'm going to have a lot to think about once we record this. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about senior and junior. I have a senior and junior in my family, and it particularly touched me when I read your acknowledgments about senior and junior. Will you tell the audience what that's about?
Yeah, so my legal name is Rickey Fayne Jr., but my dad joked once when I was getting a PhD that I didn't finish the dissertation for, that he was like, when you get that degree, just leave junior off and we can share it, right? And so, I don't know, I kind of want to take that forward and be like, very clearly acknowledge, I'm not the first Rickey Fayne, but I'm leaving the junior off so that we can share it.
I think that is very, very special. And when you look at the cover of his book, it says Rickey Fayne. Rickey, is there something somebody's never asked you, or something that you deeply want people to know that you haven't had a chance to say before?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I have one of those. Sorry.
No, you don't have to be sorry. You don't have to be sorry. May I just ask as a last question before we turn it over to the audience, how were you inspired to reimagine the devil? Because I seriously can't get out of the teaching of the church, and I can't find myself, though I now find myself thinking of him as a much more complex character.
Yeah, well, I guess I should say, like, because I was in church so much and because I believed everything adults told me when I was a little kid, I was really afraid of the devil. Like, I thought, and I, especially since the way he was talking about in church, like, I thought one day I was going to turn the corner and he was going to be there waiting. And he was going to be like, I want your soul. How much is it going to take? And I'm like, I don't know. Right? Like, I thought that moment was going to happen legitimately. And I feel like, I don't know, the poet Jericho Brown said this once where he said, you know, the thing that you're most afraid of, like, turn to it. It's gonna end up being your superpower on the other side of it. And so I feel like it was, I felt, to be honest, I felt weird writing some of those things about the devil too. I'm just like, what, like, you know, because you have that, you can't get that. And I feel like the thing is, like, even, like, if you grow up in, I feel like, any religion, and then you're like, you maybe don't follow it the way it was taught to you, there's still sort of that thing on your shoulder being like, hey, you know, you shouldn't do that.
Like, the devil gonna get you.
Like you never really walk away. You're just like you've created a new relationship to it, but it's still there somewhere, right? But I think one of the things I was thinking about for the devil and why I wanted to dream that way, because I feel like, I don't know, I was thinking that if there's hope for this figure who is the most maligned, most evil person that I heard about existing growing up that was absolute wrong, then there's hope for everyone. That means no one's beyond. If the devil can get back into heaven, right, then there's hope for everyone. Right, so I kind of leaned into that idea.
I can't think of a better way to end this podcast with the author, Rickey Fayne, the author of The Devil 3 Times. Rickey, thank you for being our guest on Black Market Reads.
Thank you for having me.
This was absolutely delightful. You're really an amazing interview, and I want to say thanks, Rickey. This has been great. Let's give a little bit of time for the audience to ask questions. Edie, would you mind?
I would not.
I think you're off, but you can get off. There you go. Is she on, Paul?
Red light on.
Red light's on. Oh, there.
There it is.
Question?
I was really delighted when I read the first chapter and I laughed out loud with the voice of the devil. I just the different ranges that you were able to embody in this book is really something. So it's quite an achievement, and I really enjoyed it. This is a nerdy question. I'm warning you. Okay, I thought maybe you were a black nerd too. You know, I just was getting that feeling. But the book is very churchy, you know? And for those of us, like, I was raised a Catholic, but, like, I was raised like a white Catholic. And I'm trying to formulate this question. So I saw Sinners, and that movie, I was like, have you seen it?
I have.
Okay, thank God. So, it starts off, and it's like, this kid, and he's like, the one room a church that his dad is the preacher of, right? And it's like, I have this anxiety as it's starting off, like, where is this going? Like, I know that there's vampires in here. I know the occult, right? And I was like, the hoodoo and all this stuff, right, comes in. But then at the end of the movie, I feel like it's making this very, at least in terms of like mainstream black culture, sort of provocative argument about black Christianity and sort of the limits of that, particularly as it relates to sort of hoodoo and the blues and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So your book, I feel like, it's sort of very much, I'm still trying to formulate, because I read the book about 2 weeks ago. So I'm sort of wondering, and maybe it's not fair to ask the author, but I'm just wondering sort of like, do you feel like your book is making any kind of an argument along the lines of sinners or not along the lines of sinners, or it's not, this connection is like I made it up in my mind or whatever, like about Black Christianity?
Thank you.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about Black Christianity, like a lot. And I feel like part of my serious thinking started with Zora Neale Hurston, and she has this line in The Sanctified Church where she says, Negroes aren't as Christianized as y'all think. Where it's just like this idea that there's some other thing in the background. Like sort of if we think about how like Black English vernacular works, right? You can say they're English words, but the grammar is coming from somewhere else. And so I was thinking of Christianity in this book as, okay, it's Christianity, but this grammar isn't 100% coming from somewhere else. Like the logic for how it's existing is on another register. And I feel like what Sinners does really well, and what I felt like I was trying to explain in that field dissertation, that he just sort of like Ryan Coogler did just like in one scene, it was like, oh, well, yeah,
The
I
man
could've
is
just done
brilliant.
that,
I mean,
right? Is this idea that separation, right? Like I feel like it's a very Western culture thing to be like, this is the divine and this is the profane, and there's like a firm line, and you have to be on one side or the other, right? And I feel like what's interesting about like the Black church and sort of like the blues tradition and the hoodoo tradition, right, is that those are all like one thing. Like it's a closed system, right, in this way. And so that moment in Sinners when he's singing, like it doesn't matter that it's not a church song. Like he calls down the Spirit. Like this is it, right? And it's the idea that it's not necessarily related to this particular religion. It's more so about this is what happens when we're in this space together and we love each other and we're being our true selves, right? We're going to invite the ancestors in. We're going to invite those of the future in. Like this is going to be it, right? And it doesn't have to be in church, right? But for so much of at least my family's history, that has been the case. So I didn't want to sort of like present an argument, more so just sort of like present it as it is, right? Like this is how, when I think about my family and when they felt the most free, it was here in this space. And it doesn't have to do anything, or it doesn't have to be related to a singular concept of Christianity. Matter of fact, if you talk to them for long enough, it might not even sound like Christianity after a while. You're just like, oh, okay, this is, what do you mean? What spirit is, you mean the Holy Spirit? No, just the Spirit. It's like, well what are you talking about? Right? Like it starts to shift a little bit, right? So I kind of wanted to present that as best I could.
You did a beautiful job.
Thank you.
Just, my voice is so loud. I don't need to record it. Sorry. Oh, this has been just an incredible discussion. I unfortunately have not had the pleasure of completing the book, but I can't wait to dig in shortly, as a matter of fact this evening. But here's a couple of thoughts and questions that I have. One is, how long was your journey in writing this book? Number two, is Senior still with us, among us? And the third is an observation as you were sharing with Lissa about oral storytelling versus the written word. Somehow I have a sense that once I start reading, I am going to feel that this is oral storytelling. But written, you have an incredible gift. And evidently it's the DNA, right? Because your dad had this gift of story. But no, it seems as though those stories are going to be jumping, or are jumping off the page. And I just can't wait. I love oral storytelling. So I can't wait to see how your book unfolds in that way. So that's 3. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess starting with, sorry, I always go to the last thing I heard, just the way my brain works. I feel like with I've always been sort of like obsessed with voices and how people talk. Like I still to this day sometimes I don't hear what people say because I'm listening to their voice. And so like I feel like there's this idea like I like the texture and what it says about like where you're from and what you value, right? And I feel like the way that my family spoke growing up, like I feel like there was like a musicality there where like I feel like part of the sound was the sense, right? Like it's not like what's being said as much as it's also how it's being said, right? So I wanted to try to pay as careful attention to that and sort of like shape it for each character, right? Because even in the same household, and I feel like that's what we don't talk about with accents a lot, like you can be in the same house with people and they all have like a slightly different spin on like it's like this is an accent for this region, but everybody's saying something a little bit different. And I feel like that's kind of where like their personality and what they value is sort of working itself out in how they're talking. So I kind of wanted to think about that for my characters as well too. Sadly, my father passed away a couple of years ago. But yeah, I mean, I feel like at some point, so I felt like I was holding on to this book because he was, you know, in it, and I could continue to think about things. And now I'm like happy that other people are experiencing, you know, what I got to experience when I was younger, maybe a little bit. Yeah. Sorry, what was the first?
Our first question. Oh, jeez, you're asking me. The journey of how long it took for you from the Genesis to completion.
I feel like that has a couple of answers. I feel like the longest part was, I remember when I was graduating college and I had dinner with my advisor and she was like, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? And without hesitating and never having thought of it before, I was like, I want to write a story about my granddad. And I was like, what? And she was like, oh, you should do that. And I was like, I didn't know I wanted to do that. And so I feel like it started kind of there a little bit, but then also like physically starting writing it was, I feel like it took a little bit longer. I think I was saying I was rereading some of my favorite books for my dissertation. I just felt like I want to be doing what they're doing. I want to be doing what they're doing. And so I decided that I wanted to, even though I knew it was impossible, I was like, I want to try to like write about something the way that like Zora Neale Hurston was writing about something, the way that Ralph Ellison was writing about something. And I'd rather spend my life working on a version of that and have it not be what I dream it is than to just want to do it.
Years.
Years?
From writing the first letter.
The first letter that got written, this was July 2015. Maybe I started that short story that never got finished. And then I sort of like, I played with it forever and I couldn't do anything with it. And then finally I was like, oh, I'm gonna write about this other character's backstory. And then that was like when the novel really started. When I was trying to think about that person's voice just for dialogue purposes, and then I ended up getting down their whole story.
So your dad was aware that you were working?
He was not. He thought I was. He was still waiting for me to be like robed. Like he thought I was or hooded rather. I was just like, yeah.
Well, Rickey, as we prepare to wrap up this podcast, and thank you, as we prepare to wrap up this podcast, we ask all of our authors, what are you reading?
Oh, right now, I'm reading Speak Memory by Vladimir Nabokov. Well, he has this, I've been thinking about like writing more explicitly about my dad, and he has this, that whole book is pretty much just him. It's like a love letter to his parents, just like remembering his childhood. So that's what I'm diving into.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
Check. I don't know. There it is. It must take a second. What was your thesis on?
Oh, I mean, it was on specifically spirituality and politics in 20th century African American literature.
Whoa.
That was a short one. My other question, going back to Lissa's question about cancel culture, if that's what we can call it, I'd like to play the devil's advocate for the record.
Unintended, apparently.
And maybe take a positive spin on the answer. Some would say, why bring up all these bad feelings? Why is it so important? I mean, your book was so amazing, and to me, it is such a stellar example of why we can't just not look back. Can you talk to why it's so important?
Yeah, I feel like it goes back to what I was saying about that Walter Benjamin quote about like moments being citable, right? And I feel like and this is, it might just be the translator use that moment citable spoke to me as like being like it's in the thing of index that happened to humanity, like it's the story of humanity. But I feel like if you can pull something out and it still evokes pain, it still evokes tears, and you can think about like, not that my grandfather was a slave, but my grandfather's grandfather, like this person that I was so close to him, he was so close to them, and they were enslaved. Like it's not really as far past as we want to say it is, right? And that's kind of why I wanted to show just like these family relationships going all the way back then, because it's just like, if you can like think about it not in terms of, oh, it's been X many years or this many things have happened, but no, this person I loved someone who was in this situation, right? So it's not that far away.
Beautiful.
The past has never passed. This has been a marvelous and very deep conversation. I want to say thank you, Rickey.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad you brought me out here.
Oh my goodness sakes, we couldn't have it any other way. His name is Rickey Fayne. His book, The Devil 3 Times. Once you pick it up, warning, you won't be able to put it down. This is Black Market Reads. I'm your host, Lissa Jones, for the smart and free thinking. We'll see you again next time.